This sonata was composed in 1804, which is now considered to be Beethoven's so-called second period. This was the time when he composed the Eroica Symphony, the Third Symphony. And soon after this sonata, he composes the Appassionata, Opus 57. All large-scale works, extremely dynamic, and perhaps a kind of a style for which Beethoven is best known. But even among all these works, the Waldstein is extremely masterful in his use of very small ideas, very simple ideas to create extremely effective musical ideas. Now, what strikes you in the beginning of this first movement is the energy. And we hear the so-called main theme, which is sort of like a constant, persistent hammering of the C major chord. And you can hardly call this a melody. You know, if we think of other C major sonatas, such as Mozart, so simple, C major, we associate it with simplicity and maybe even naivete. But this is definitely not simple and definitely not naive. It's extremely raw in its energetic power, and this kind of energy persists throughout this movement. And staying with this subject of energy, we continue with this when the main theme returns. The same theme is now presented and so he gives instead an introduction to the final movement, a very mysterious, slow introduction. And he does this actually later again in Opus 101 as well as some of his later cello sonatas. The key, though it is in F major, meanders, just like the first movement, meanders into various keys. From the opening, we have an F major chord and resolves to an E major. And throughout, the key is extremely unstable until the very end of this introduction, where it finally settles to C major to prepare for the final movement. What this can be likened to, if we compare it to another genre, is perhaps in an arioso, which is sort of a blend between an aria and in an opera and recitative. And so if we do make the comparison, this opening would be an orchestral introduction. And the voice finally ends. So even in the opening, we hear numerous layers. We hear one, sort of a gong sound, and then another fifth higher up, and then yet another higher pitched sound. And one of the difficulties of this movement is trying to maintain these various layers separate, because it really, when we hear them as separate layers, it really makes the piece much, much more beautiful. He uses throughout this movement the pentatonic scale, and the opening melody that we hear is a B pentatonic scale, which is closely associated with the East. But listen to how he takes this melody and transforms this melody depending on the harmonies underneath. The first time, under a B major chord or over a B major chord, and then B7, and then E7, sort of a warmer chord, and then very, very different. And also